In a new report based on the largest statistical analysis of the media coverage of the atrocities committed in Israel on October 7 and Israel's genocidal campaign against the Palestinian people in the first month of the war, the Muslim Council of Britain's Centre of Media Monitoring (CfMM) laid out the empirical evidence for these observations and concerns. Looking at some 180,000 video clips from 7 United Kingdom broadcasters and 3 international broadcasters, as well as about 26,000 news articles from 28 British media websites, CfMM has assessed whether the UK media have reliably informed the public on the conflict and shared the positions of all concerned parties responsibly. In line with the findings of smaller-scale studies conducted thus far, it found that Israeli narratives, voices and grievances were favored over Palestinian voices, narratives and grievances in the coverage. Israel's rights were insistently emphasized, often resulting in the exclusion and erasure of the rights of the Palestinians. Emotive language was consistently used for Israeli victims of violence, but not as much for the Palestinians. Representatives and supporters of Israel were allowed to dehumanize Palestinians on air with no considerable pushback from news presenters and talk show hosts. Analyzing the coverage under 6 themes: contextualization, language, framing, claims, the undermining of Palestinian sources, and the misrepresentation of pro-Palestinian protesters, the research found that many news outlets have opted to present news from an Israeli perspective, often with significant lapses in basic fact-checking and verification. Remarkably, the analysis unveiled that Palestinian symbols such as the Palestinian flag were overwhelmingly used to illustrate stories on anti-Semitism. It also exposed the many Islamophobic aspects of the coverage, such as the framing of pro-Palestine protests and support as inherently dangerous and akin to a terror threat, often because of the Muslim presence among them.
The report revealed that the Islamophobic trope of Islam being an anti-Semitic religion was repeatedly presented by editors, analysts and columnists alike as a driving force behind the growing opposition to Israel and its treatment of Palestinians. This led to the misrepresentation of the 75-year conflict in Israel-Palestine as a religious war between Muslims and Jews, rather than a matter of oppression and occupation. The report determined that the pro-Palestinian voices and Palestinian activists have repeatedly been misrepresented by many British media outlets since the beginning of the conflict. It found that the right-wing media has been particularly hostile towards the pro-Palestinian voices, framing them as the supporters of terrorism, anti-Semites, as well as being hostile to the British values. The analysis also unearthed many instances of the misinformation through deliberate omission. The context of the decade-long Israeli oppression of the Palestinian people and occupation of Palestinian territory was absent from the most of the coverage. The coverage was framed in a way that implied that the conflict started on October 7th. The report showed how some reportage on the ongoing war failed to even mention that the West Bank is a Palestinian territory occupied by Israel, and that according to the international law, Gaza has also been effectively under Israeli occupation prior to October 7th, despite the absence of a military presence on the ground since 2005.